Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on your time zone. I want to welcome everybody to this seminar, part of our sustainability webinar series. My name is Professor Luis Seco. I'm the director of the Masters in Mathematical Finance program at the University of Toronto. And today it is my pleasure to introduce this seminar on the future of liquid fuels. Liquid fuels are a cornerstone of the for the evolution of the transportation industry into a net zero emission target. And today we're very lucky to have one of the leading experts on this, Alain Mathurin, who is the Communications Director of Fuels Europe. He has been working in this space for a very long time, knows what's happening, and today we hope he's going to give us a glimpse as to what's coming and what the future is going to be. I should say that this seminar is sponsored by JUMP, and it is being hosted by the Master's Program in Mathematical Finance and the Race Club at the University of Toronto, as well as the Fields Institute. So, Alain, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Luis, and thank you for the kind introduction. And I'm indeed absolutely delighted to be here with you today and to give some insights of what it looks when it comes to liquid fuels, what kind of liquid fuels we're talking about, with, of course, our common objective that we share in a number of regions, I'd say, with a leading European region when it comes to achieving net zero in 2050, which is really the end point we have in mind. I have prepared a couple of slides which are a bit going to present where we are in terms of ambitions, where we are in terms of policy framework, and what this means when it comes to the investors community. I'm trying to give this general overview, and then obviously I'm more than happy to come into more detailed questions to all of you when the time for the Q&A has come. So I am going to share my screen now so that we can have a view of the slides. There we go. Just confirm that you do see my screen. Perfect, thank you. So, title, there we go. I need to move the next one. This is it. So, the road to 2050, you probably know, maybe some of you, I've not a clear view of the audience and where you're coming from, so I have to give a bit of probably some obvious information, but I prefer to repeat it to make it clear. Europe has a climate law, which is in fact a legally binding regulation that imposes zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 to each and every member state in the EU. This means that the climate law with the endpoint at 2050, meaning zero, there has been an intermediate step that has been set, and that intermediate step is indeed minus 55% in 2030, which is, I'd say, next, almost around the corner. Concretely, I'm just making sure. Let me show you a bit what this means in terms of journey. The climate law and also what is called the Green Deal, which is the political document that has been shaping all of that, is built on this graph and a number of scenarios around it, which comes from the Clean Planet for All, which was the first, I'd say, work done by the European Commission to see what were the options in terms of reducing drastically emissions in the EU. The one that was kept ultimately and served as a blueprint for the Green Deal and all the subsequent legislative reviews is the 1.5 tech scenario. And that one just gives you an idea where we are. We are in 2020, so we are somewhere here. And the endpoint in 25 years is here. What does that mean? Net zero. How do we achieve it? So basically what you can see here is that there will be a number of sectors that will be able to achieve negative emissions. That you can see here, you have carbon removal technologies. That's probably what we can qualify as CCS and CCUS. And you have land use. That is another way with the carbon sinks as another way to create negative emissions. For the rest, there are a few sectors that will keep a little bit of emissions. Which are they? Well, we see a little bit here. It's the greenish part here. That's transport. You see it's hardly nothing left. The bigger part is non-CO2 from agriculture. And here you have a bigger share, and you will have a little share here still in industry. So basically, when we look at this graph, and we are an energy production company, and we are from the conventional energy production companies, our feedstock, main feedstock is fossil. The message is very clear. We need to rethink completely the strategy. Building on that, what does that mean concretely when it comes to fossil-based fuels? What you can see on this graph is still based on the 1.5 PEC scenario, is that with the policies that have been adopted for 2030, we would only achieve in 2050, for 2030, sorry, we will only achieve a reduction in terms of demand up to 207 million tons of oil-based products. Today, we have a consumption around 362. I'm talking transports. What the Commission has in mind is an endpoint at 30 million tons, which is 50% from the remaining sectors that are aviation and maritime, and half of it only. So the total amount that they envisage for aviation and maritime is 60 million tons, out of which half is still fossil-based. And basically, this is this little element share that was remaining in the previous graph, are those 30 million tons. It's divided by 10, and this has a significant impact, obviously, on the way you're going to invest, on the way you're going to conduct even the choices in the companies and the refineries that you will be continuing to enhance, to maintain, etc. It's a dramatic change. How are they going to achieve this? Well, there is a pact that has been published in July 2021 that was the Fit for 55 package with, I think there were about 20 different regulations in there. I've listed only those that have a direct impact on the fuels for transport. We have the emission standards for light duty vehicles, also known as CO2 in cars. You have the Renewable Energy Directive. You have the Refuel EU Aviation, which is a new directive that has been proposed, and it's aimed at enabling to clearly set a direction and targets and objectives for the aviation sector. You have Fuel EU Maritime, which is exactly the same. It's a new piece of legislation with the same ambitions for the maritime sector. You have emission standards for heavy-duty vehicles, or better called as CO2 in trucks. You have an Alternative Fuels Infrastructure Directive. It has changed name, but it is more or less the same as the previous version. It's just the deployment of alternative fuels infrastructure deployment. Then there is something which is probably the one that will have the most impact in the short term. It's the ETS for transport and buildings. And just a little word on that one. We know that for the ETS, there is this emission trading system, which means that energy intensive industries that are emitting CO2 have to purchase allowances, provided they are under international competition. They can have a number of free allowances depending on the performance of the best 10% of the sector. And you need to be at the benchmark, and you only receive allowances for that. In the case of the ETS for transport, there was a risk that this could have been included in the overall ETS. Fortunately not. It's a separate ETS specifically dedicated for transport and buildings. The objective that has been set is a minus 43% for the two sectors. It doesn't give an indicative target or a separate target. It just requires that both transport and buildings achieve minus 43 in 2030. This is a few percent higher than what is the objective when we think about the ETS, and puts a strong burden in transport, because achieving minus 43% in buildings seems, at least as where we are today, almost impossible. And I'll come back to the consequences of it. And then the one piece of legislation that will be a cornerstone, but for the time being remains a very difficult piece, is the taxation directive. These are those that have an impact when it comes to looking into the future of fuels, what type of products, and all related to transport. Where are we in terms of finalization? Emission standard for light duty has been almost finalized. The compromise between the Parliament, the Commission, and the Council has taken place in what they call trilogues, has taken place in end October, and they have managed to get an agreement there. It was even in November for the final meeting, and they have achieved a decision which was to keep zero emission for 2035 with an intermediate step, a review clause in 2026. I'll come back to that one later in this presentation. The Renewable Energy Directive is not yet finalized. There has been a number of parts of it that have been going through and went to an agreement. There are some discussions today on the feedstocks, and that's another important element when it comes to predictability of legislation. Refuel EU Aviation and Fuel EU Maritime are both in, I'd say, still in discussion. They are not completed. We believe they should be in the early days of the Swedish presidency, and they will, of course, have an impact on the directions and aviation. It could unlock some developments to supply fuels with objectives for the aviation sector and also for the maritime sector. The challenge for those sectors, those two pieces, is that aviation and maritime are international sectors, where the domestic share of the legislation that it can be covered is limited compared to the international dimension of it. So for the time being, where their agreement will be easily made is for the domestic aviation, the domestic flights, and the same for maritime. International, we need to get the buy-in from the overall organizations like IMO, for instance, for shipping, or CORSIA for the or the ICAO for the aviation sector. Emission standards for heavy duty is not yet published. The proposal of the Commission was due in November. It has ultimately been postponed, and we have seen very recently that the Commission is planning at presenting their proposal end of May 24th. This implies that we do have some doubts about the ability to conclude the file and to come to an agreement between the three institutions before the next elections of the European elections that are taking place in May 2024. Just as an example, emission standards were published in July 21, concluded in November 22. So that's a 15-month journey. It is hardly impossible to do that for the HDV if we take the same time frame. So that might be pushed to the next commission. The Alternative Fuel Infrastructure Directive has progressed well, and I'd say there is little to say, but that, of course, the targets are set. Now it will be all about deploying it, and we'll see whether we can meet and achieve that, especially when it comes to the infrastructure for electric technologies. ETS for transport, I mentioned. Basically, as I said, 43% reduction means that compared to the demand we expect in 2030, it is likely to require to produce less if you don't want to be impacted by the 40% target, meaning that the only way not to achieve the 43% compared to 2005 is to produce less if you don't have the means or you don't want to buy allowances for the amount that will be exceeding it. And that's a significant challenge, which can be a huge opportunity to replace that share of products that will not be produced by low carbon or renewable fuels. And finally, taxation directive is the elephant in the room in another way. It's the piece that is the most important one when it comes to delivering fiscal or taxation signals to customers, consumers, businesses. But it is a directive which requires unanimity. And achieving unanimity when it comes to taxes is probably the hardest thing that is possible. And up to now, this taxation directive was proposed for revision since probably 15 years. It has never been able to be achieved due to this unanimity rule, and which makes it extremely difficult. However, taxation is the easiest way, the easiest lever to support new technologies and to enable them to scale up market penetration and obviously production. Let me go to the next slide. So, as you can see from the Commission's ambition and what was adopted by the member states with the climate law and the ultimate trajectory when it comes to fuels and transport, the only two sectors where we can clearly see that there is a need for fuels, liquid fuels, whatever feedstock now, we're just talking about the form of the energy, is aviation and maritime, where it is extremely difficult to replace the current and incumbent energy carrier by something that would be electrified or hydrogen. Technically, we are very far from that, and we need to make sure that we do keep those sectors as effective and as competitive as possible, because international competition is not waiting for us to find our solutions, and they are continuing to develop their businesses. We need to make sure that this happens. Therefore, many voices are repeatedly saying the fuels are only needed for those two sectors. It should go directly to those two sectors. We should not distract ourselves from trying to put something in transport. We do have a technical solution, that is electrification. And that is correct. Electrification could be indeed the technology for road transport. We do see some limitations, uses. We do see some subsectors in road transport that will not necessarily be decarbonized through electrification, but probably still through liquid fuels. But the volumes that this will represent are very limited compared to the size of the electric vehicle penetration that they will experience. However, if we want to build a market for the aviation and maritime sectors, we need to create a lead market first. It's not a secret. We all know that low carbon technologies have a higher cost, and that those higher costs require a number of elements to get a progressive reduction. It's scaling up production. It is learning and improving the production system. And of course, it is also benefiting from a number of incentives and fiscal supports. The road transport is the only sector where we do have means to support those fuels to create that lead market. Why this point? Aviation fuels are traditionally sold around 60, 70 cents the liter, and these are untaxed. So basically, you don't have a single room of maneuver to use the tax component to incentivize the use of other fuels. Compared to road transport, where we do have a significant tax component in the price, we know that more or less taxation represents between 55 and 60%, 55 for gasoline, sorry, for diesel, and 60% for gasoline of the price at the pump. And that taxation component becomes a real lever where we could have we could find support. As an example, there is a product in France which is called E85, first generation ethanol. That means 85% ethanol and 15% fossil. That product is sold with a taxation on the fuel product of 15% compared to 100% for a fossil-based fuel. The 80% reduction that they apply to the taxation reflects the emission reduction that the fuel enables. This has created a very competitive fuel that many French users have been willing to purchase and to replace their conventional gasoline purchase by that fuel, simply because there is a price signal, and this is an important element. The second point is also in some regions they are much more advanced, and Sweden, for instance, has already applied a zero taxation on biofuels, and they have received again the green light from the Commission to continue that policy, meaning that this is how you can make the volumes to create then something which will be able to be presented into those sectors where we don't have those levers. And this is why the critical role of road transport in the uptake of renewable fuels is so important. And contrary to what people are always trying to push, we strongly believe that this is not a way to try to give a second life or a third life to the old technologies. It's really the basics of market creation that we're trying to put in place. For the time being, when it comes to light duty vehicles, this has not been successful. However, and I'll come back to that point. What we are thinking about and what the industry is thinking about when it comes to what can be its role in the transition. Firstly, the idea was the liquid fuel by itself, given its energy density, ease of storage, ease of distribution, and obviously competitive and price, is the best solution when it comes to those elements compared to what the downsides are of electrification. You need a battery, you need to change the technology, you need to change the vehicle, you need to create a new infrastructure, and you don't have the same density. The bigger the battery, the further you get, but you will never get as far with a battery than you will get with 70 or 60 liters of liquid fuels. So the thing we were thinking about is we need to remove what's bad in the liquid fuels and find means to remove that CO2 that is creating the climate challenge. This is where the strategy for low carbon fuels has emerged about 5-6 years ago, started to work on it and to describe a clear pathway to achieve it. This pathway has given us given the policies that were already adopted based on that for 2030, we found that we could, for road transport, be able to supply 93 million tons, which is more or less 25% of the overall demand for transport sector, knowing that road represents 80% of the total demand. So we would be somewhere around a third of the demand for road. Obviously, it doesn't mean that we will not be able to meet the demand. It will be electrification will play a significant role. So we do recognize that. Plus efficiency gains will also be significant when it comes to the internal combustion engines and performance. And finally, let's not forget also the role that hydrogen can play under various forms, gaseous or high fuel cell and so on. And this strategy translates as this graph that you have here, which I'm very happy to detail a little bit. I'm going to start with the left part of the graph, and you can see my mouse here. So we are today, this was produced in 2020. This is where we started. And between 2020 and 2030, we believe that we could increase the overall low carbon fuel production up to 30 million tons. That would represent an investment between 30 and 40 billion euros, as you can see here. To do that, we would need a number of technologies to be able to meet that objective. First generation biofuels, they are there. They already exist. It's part of the 2008 Climate and Energy Package. They are in 2020 at 14 million. This is what they represent in the share in the fuel pool. They will not really increase. It's first generation. There are a number of challenges when it regards first generation bio. So we just see a mechanical increase of 1 million tons, but not more than that. And as you can see in the future, they don't really have a role to play as a significant part of the strategy. The strategy comes more from the three other parts. Hydro-treated vegetable oils, what we also call HVO. And HVO is probably the leading bio product today on the market and is more in the family of advanced bio. There are some HVOs from first generation, but we're here talking about the second generation. And today, between what is already up and running in terms of production units and those that are announced for the next 2-3 years, we can consider that we already have a number that would be around 7 to 8 million tons of HVO. And you can see we have as a estimate something around 10 million tons coming from 5, which was a number in 2020. So we believe that we will be on the right path to meet that first objective for HVO. The second one is what we really call second generation or advanced bio, is lignocellulosic. We're talking about waste. Agriculture residues, that's what remains after that. All the agriculture production is used for the other sectors. All that you don't need, all that you throw, you burn, or you leave on the ground, we can make valuable fuels out of those. The other part will be forestry residues. Again, good forest management helps in many ways. And all that is not usable, nor for the wood industry, nor for just maintaining the forest, or we're not talking about trees, we're talking about residues, what you just walk in the forest and you see laying on the ground. All of that is also valuable feedstock for fuels. And the third element is the waste, mainly municipal waste and industrial waste. I just forgot to mention in the HVO part, we do also have in there is a definition of it, all the used cooking oils, all the used industrial oils, and obviously vegetable oils from crops that can be dedicated to that production. Back here, you can see we're starting from scratch when it comes to lignocellulosic feedstocks, and expect to reach some 4 million tons by 2030. E-fuels, and this is probably the piece that you're all waiting for, is where are we going? Well, e-fuels is a long journey. E-fuels has, in our opinion, in the first decade between now and 2030, a very limited role with 1 million tons. Why? Well, basically, the challenge of e-fuels is very simple. To be sustainable, e-fuels can only be made of green electricity and using captured CO2, not emitted from the source like a cement plant or whatever. This is where the legislation today is extremely demanding and constraining, because they do limit those elements. So we have no traction today for e-fuels produced from blue hydrogen or from pink hydrogen or from turquoise hydrogen. That's not part of the discussion, even if we do use CCS, etc. It has to be green electricity. We are far from having a very mature grid in Europe. You can see that today we have been even opening coal mines to supply the shift from Russian gas to other suppliers, and to make sure that we would meet the demand. Coal has come back in the picture. So using electricity from Europe to produce e-fuels today is a bit hypothetical. We need to go outside of the EU, or in some countries that have an exceedant of electricity, green electricity, Scandinavia. And obviously, we do see very strong opportunities out of Europe, North Africa, Middle East, Australia, and other regions. And probably this is where we have to create, together with where the first units already started to be built, and I'm thinking of Norway as one of the main regions where we see that. But we do see strong potential when it comes to those other regions out of Europe. You have the example of Porsche that has been investing in Chile to produce its e-fuels for the 911, and that has now started effective production. And finally, the last point there is the technology that we use to reduce the emissions when it comes to the production of the fuels. That's the mainly green electricity and the carbon capture and storage technology, which enables us to reduce the emissions at the production level. This is between 2020 and 2030. We see we are low profile when it comes to ambition. We really believe that 2035 will be the starting point. This is when it all starts to happen. And you see that we are more into something that starts to look like a more steep increase by 2035. It's just the technical requirements, building the units, feasibility study, learning from them. And then you start to develop a second unit. And this is when the several units are following. You do have an impact also on the prices. And that's also the way you need to do to build those markets. This is where the big story starts. And you can see at the end of the journey in 2050, we have done a significantly higher investment expectation, something around 400 to 600 50 billion euros. You may say that this is a very large delta. However, we would probably see it closer to the higher range than to the lower range. And with those up to 650 billion euros, we do expect to be able to produce up to 150 million tons. Is this possible with the feedstock, especially the bio feedstock? Definitely it is. The biomass study from the London Imperial College has indeed proven that there is enough feedstock to reach those numbers. So that's the first element. And when it comes to the e-fuels, if we include imports of feedstock, and I'm thinking in this case of either methanol or hydrogen, the way it will be liquefied from the electricity production abroad, we will also have enough. And you can see that both technologies, lignocellulosic and e-fuels, will play a significant role. Whether one or other will be topping for sure, which one today is extremely difficult to say, but I would be tempted to say that e-fuels are probably likely to overtake the bio amount. What is also important is hydrotreated vegetable oils, which are the most important or almost the most important one today, are very limited when it comes to the longer term. We don't see strong progress there. And well, the technologies from the production of the energy remain stable. We have them installed. The production sites are there. What does this mean? This means that we're going to fundamentally change also the value chains. Current value chains for the production of energy are extremely simple. You do have a production of fuels, crude oil in the refinery. The refinery refines those products. Products get out and go to the distribution. Now we're going to have to develop value chains that are closer to the places where we find the feedstocks. And when it comes to agriculture, forestry, you're better off already transforming that feedstock on site rather than trying to transport it. The logistics of that would be probably a significant break and a significant impact on the cost of that. So change in value chain, new sectors joining, agriculture, forestry, municipal waste and other elements. So we can see that it's going to fundamentally change the structure of the energy production, but it gives new opportunities for investment for sure. Sorry, wrong side. Just an element, because there are some beliefs that with electricity, we can probably address a number of points, such as security of supply. And unfortunately, we have to acknowledge that the war in Ukraine has shown to Europe how fragile the region is when it comes to its security of supply. It has been taken for granted that it would be supplied easily. It has taken for granted that you just needed to open the valves and it would flow in. No one had expected that we would face such a war at the border of the region and that would have such an impact. What is currently the situation? Europe has a legal obligation for each member state, and ultimately in the member state, the companies that do deliver those products, to set strategic stocks. It's 90 days of either refined or raw materials, so oil or refined products, have to be stored safely in case. 90 days. If you would add up the 90 days for the 27 countries, it takes us to 2,000 terawatt hours of energy that is stored for security of supply. If you add to that what was stored for natural gas strategic stocks, we have about 1,000 terawatt hours. Now, what one believes is that with electricity, it will be very easy to have also security of supply because you can play with the grid. But let's clearly look at the numbers here. We have 200 million EVs on the road. Let's imagine that we are full electrified, 200 million vehicles. Each of them has a 100 kilowatt hour battery, fully charged, with a two-way plug, meaning you can charge or you can offload because you need it for the grid. How much does that represent in terms of storage of energy? 20 terawatt hours. So basically, you're at 1% of what is considered today as a strategic stock. This is a significant signal that if you want to secure your supply, you have to consider liquid fuels as a critical element in there. And therefore, we do believe that this is another element which is specifically after 2022 has become central in the way policymakers are considering to ensure that security of supply in their respective member states, which means that when it comes back, and I'm going to go back to one legislation I mentioned to you, which is this minus 43% related to the ETS in buildings and transport. If we want to apply and to achieve it, we will have to reduce production, but further than what the reduction of demand implies, because you will otherwise have to buy allowances to cover the additional emissions that you are emitting because you want to meet demand. The only way is to reduce. By reducing and also reducing demand over time, we have 85 refineries. We have a significant, strong and steep reduction of demand for fossil-based fuels, meaning that from those 85 refineries, a number will have to be changed, converted, transformed in whatever. But what is sure is you cannot maintain 85 refineries in Europe, and we already see that this is happening. There is a capacity reduction, and this capacity reduction, it's one of my conclusions, but I already share it, is going faster than the reduction in demand. Therefore, we can really see and expect some member states to oppose this natural trajectory because they will be willing to keep a refinery in the country as the insurance of that security of supply that is so much needed, so much required. We can find ways here to replace that by a liquid fuel strategy, a low carbon liquid fuel strategy. Basically, the conclusion of this slide about how important energy security is today again. Here you have a little idea of how we see the evolution of the reduction of the demand and how it can be replaced by those liquid fuels that I was mentioning. So we are in 2020, we do have 350 million tons of oil-based products, which is more or less at that time, 95% of the fuels for transport. This has to reduce and will be divided more or less by 2, reaching 180 million. And we do have instead the low carbon fuels that are going to grow and to replace those. And this is exactly the way we see that trajectory, a progressive increase from one, a progressive decrease from the other, and we do have a switch and a replacement of one by the other. And this is what we have to aim at. Progressive, but you can still see that between 2030 and 2040, the speed of the reduction is pretty impressive. And let's consider that, meaning that investments to produce the liquid fuels, but with a non-fossil feedstock, will really have to start to be accelerated between now and 2025, 2026, at least no later than the end of the decade, if you want to meet the 2040 deadline, where you will have to produce, you will have to bring on the market that amount of fuels. And this will require investment decisions rather sooner than later. So how do we see this in terms of energy strategy? There is currently already in Europe a renewable and low carbon power strategy. That's what has been put together with the support for renewables, for electricity production and power generation, and you have all the support that has been given to wind, solar, and other technologies, with also the 10-year, 15-year contracts that were facilitated to sell that electricity and to enable that to be supported and to increase the production of the amount of renewable power. The second strategy that the EU has put together, not such a long time ago, is the hydrogen strategy. And that hydrogen strategy has the ambition to push on hydrogen because they do see hydrogen as the option for many sectors, also industry. And that's on, I'd say that's in place. So what we think we need now is two elements: a renewable and low carbon gas strategy. Let's not forget the role of gases. And a renewable and low carbon liquids strategy. These are not there yet. They are, and if they are there, they are only aimed at a limited part of the sectors, and we're thinking of aviation and maritime. So what do we see when it comes to the renewable low carbon gas strategy? We have biomass waste and residues as feedstocks, which you can then transform into ammonia or synthetic methane. When it comes to renewable low carbon liquid strategy, you have methanol, you have SAF, methanol, maritime, SAF, aviation, and obviously renewable and low carbon transport fuels and products for the transport road sector. This is where we do have two bodies that are driving those strategies. The Hydrogen Council is existing and drives the hydrogen strategy. And there is this recently created alliance from the Commission, Renewable and Low Carbon Fuels Value Chain Alliance, which has the ambition to create new value chains, and this is what is in the name of the alliance, to identify means to stimulate investments, etc. The only element that we are trying to maintain is that it should be directed to all transport sectors and not exclusively maritime and aviation. So a few thoughts to conclude on the climate neutrality objective of the EU. Europe will need molecular energy in many forms to complement electrification. Certainly for hard to abate sectors, but also probably for those where we believe electrification can be the only solution, we will see that we will need some molecules there too. Europe needs a strategy to manage the transition, because otherwise it will likely be extremely difficult between discrepancies for supply and demand, as I explained with the 43% from the ETS. We might already have there a reduction in supply, which will be higher than the demand. So it has to be complemented. A strategy to anticipate all those movements is absolutely necessary. Transition means that declining refining activities will be declining. We will reduce progressively production to align with demand. And as you know, when it comes to refining and oil, and by the way, we do have a similar requirement with other type of feedstocks. You just don't produce 100% aero, aviation fuel. You don't just produce 100% gasoline or 100% diesel. You need to have a little bit of all, because that's what the physics of those products and the chemicals of those products require. So the capacity will also reduce when it comes to how you can monetize the other products that might not have a market or a very small market and that are still part of your production stream. These are elements that can accelerate that decline of the refining capacity, meaning that it should stimulate an increase of the production of renewable fuels. And I think these two factors here, these two specific elements, are the ones that are the strongest lever for really driving a renewable fuel strategy, where the EU could bring together all the means that they have done at the time for electricity and they are trying to do for hydrogen. They could deploy all of that. And we could see the Bank of Investment, we could see the Bank Reconstruction and Development, we can see many others that could start to see how to contribute to projects. And I think this is really the element that should accelerate that. But this will also require many policy supports. So besides the funds and the financing, we're thinking also of taxation, incentivization, support. Electric vehicles have benefited from a significant support. 10,000 subsidies, 10,000 euro subsidies for some, free electricity, free parking, free this. If you count it up, an electric vehicle has benefited for more or less 20,000 euros of subsidies in whatever form. We don't need that amount. We're not asking for that. We are asking for signals that enables a broader share of the market to start using those products. So we are less, we are not a question of ambition. We don't believe we need that much. Diversification, feedstocks, conversion technology, geographical locations. It will not remain only in some areas. It will change from what we know today, and it will probably go beyond the borders of Europe. Just talking about the e-fuels, there are regions that do have a strong future from that perspective. Again, a one technology only scenario will imply that some subsectors will face challenges because that one technology only choice will not meet their way of using their vehicles, and it's an important element to maintain the opportunity for people to take what's best for their uses. And then there is something that is occurring, is that we need policy support, and this is what we are trying to work on extremely strongly within the association with all the stakeholders, and when it comes to other trade associations that are representing e-Fuels Alliance and others, we're really joining forces here to try to get that policy support. We do see some signals, and just a few elements here. We have a strong signal that the 2026 review clause for the light-duty vehicle decision made November, which means zero emission target for 2035, is likely to be a major opportunity to reinstate the role of non-fossil renewable fuels in the strategy or in the legislation, meaning we don't change the target. We still aim at zero emission, but we do recognize the zero emission characteristic of those fuels. This is not the case today. And if you can associate those fuels as vehicles, making them zero emission, you will be able to give a first, say that market creation, lead market creation that we are asking for. 2026 can be a huge opportunity with the next commission, with also we hear that Commissioner Breton is really willing to make sure that the transition is feasible, is doable. He has created a group called Group 2035, and that group is going to monitor meetings every quarter to monitor how all the elements to achieve the strategy for a full electrification scenario are coming together. And if by 2026, there are sufficient elements that indicate that this is not feasible, he will, at least this is his political message, he will make proposals to adjust the legislation to make sure that we still meet our target for 2035, but we give ourselves additional means to get there. And that's a very important milestone in our view. The second one is, given the latest situation, when the Commission was looking and the Parliament and member states were looking into CO2 in light-duty vehicles, we had a little bit of COVID, yes, but something really dramatic when it comes to the impact on a technology choice and dependency. We had certainly not the energy crisis that started before the war in Ukraine, and we have the war in Ukraine with the impact on the energy costs. This has fundamentally changed the picture, and we believe that the way we will be looking at efficiency standards in emission standards, in heavy duty, will be completely different from the way it has been done for light duty vehicles, meaning that we could probably secure a good significant role for low carbon or renewable fuels in the legislation from the very beginning. This is where we are having good hopes. Plus, we also see potential political shift movement for 2024, which will also change a bit the balance within the Parliament and maybe also within the Commission, knowing that each of the commissioners have their political sensitivities, and this might have an impact. So, a number of political signals that give us good perspectives. I cannot say more than that. We'll have to wait, but it goes in that direction at least. Still the ambition to create that lead market for road, and still the ambition that by 2035, if we want to give a significant role to low carbon fuels, we will have to unlock a significant amount of investment. And you have seen what is the end journey, up to 600 billion. And again, it's interesting is there is no request for that amount. It's the request is for the framework we need to enable those investments to deliver a return. That's the important element, and this is what we are asking for. I wanted to put this in the context. So what do we have? We have here a number of projects, and you can see they're already happening. Some of them are pilots, big pilots, small industrial units, but we don't have, besides HVO units, We don't have any significantly big industrial project when it comes to e-fuels or other advanced biofuels like the residues, etc. And this is probably where the investment capacity is most needed. We need to accelerate the uptake of those technologies, starting in Europe, because we need to ensure that we do have a domestic production, and then going beyond, where we will see probably very favorable investment conditions also. And what we are thinking of is all projects have the merit to exist, but we're not sure that everyone knows about them. This takes me to Jump sponsoring this webinar, and thank Jump for that. We believe it's an important message. Jump can be an accelerator for low carbon projects. The interface that Jump proposes, this virtual community that it can create, where you can find various sectors, various stakeholder groups, to give you an idea between research and development, academics, entrepreneurs, investors, policymakers. It becomes a meeting point. It becomes I'd say, joint thinking point where we can develop strategies and we can find out about things, showcasing technologies, virtual presentations, visits, etc. The potential that that virtual platform offers can be, I mean, almost say the sky is the limit when you think about it. We also think that we should not have just one sector. So liquid fuels is an easy one because it's really at the heart of the discussions, and mobility is critical in our society. But there are other sectors that will have tough times when it comes to achieving the 2050 objective. Agriculture will have to decarbonize. Buildings, the 43%, they will not make it in 2030, but they will have to achieve the same result in 2050. So they'll have to speed up. So there is a huge potential and a huge demand for low carbon technologies in buildings. Energy, as I mentioned. And then you also have food sector in the way food is produced. I forgot to mention it on the slide here. Basically, all of those coming together in one environment, in one platform dedicated to sustainability. This is what Jump can offer. All those synergies between stakeholders, bringing entrepreneurs and investors together, bringing policymakers and investors, bringing policymakers and entrepreneurs, enabling policy framework conversations, discussions about regulations, and ultimately, what's the important element? Unlocking investments. So we believe that if we can try to find such a platform and we can develop it to achieve that, we would probably be lucky contributors to an acceleration of the sustainability technologies in the EU. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you very much for it on the developments on low carbon liquid fuels in Europe. I would like to open the floor for questions before I ask you my own. If anybody in the audience has a question, I would ask them to please unmute yourself and to speak, or alternatively use the chat to put your question, and we will read it for Alain. So there is a question, I think, from Deborah.
Hi, Luis, and thanks for the presentation. That was really insightful. Wondering if you could just take a moment. You talked about some of the technological challenges associated with e-fuels and the timing of bringing e-fuels. But can you just maybe talk about particularly the second generation biofuels, the second generation technologies? Like where are we with those technological advances, and how close are we from a technological perspective to being able to achieve that?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Deborah. Well, yes, indeed. And I think the value of your question is to show that there are various technologies that will have to live together. And we're not talking about one winner and one loser. All of them will be able to deliver. And it's important to see where we are. And I'd say that whereas the first generation is capped for environmental and sustainability reasons due to the difficult start they had in 2008. And their that cap is unlikely to change, so we don't consider those. Plus, palm oil and other feedstocks like that will be removed if they are not already from some of the energy producers. HVO is in the middle. It's a bit of first generation. It's a bit of advanced. It's the most advanced technology. It's the one where most of the refineries that have been converted, I'm thinking of the Total Energy refineries in France, there are two. The two refineries in Italy of Eni, plus a third one to come. And of course, the Finnish company Neste, which has one refinery remaining and has more or less converted 80% of their production into HVO, and are also looking into advanced biofuels. Advanced biofuels instead don't have that level of development, don't have real industrial units. They are still at very small scale, pilots. They are suffering from one significant challenge today. It's the uncertainty and the unclarity about what will be part of the list in the annexes of the Renewable Energy Directive that outlines which feedstocks are seen or are assessed as sustainable. And there is a very long conversation today around forestry feedstock, forestry residues. That's the Parliament wanted to drastically reduce. We will see where the debate goes when it comes to the member states. They do have different views. Scandinavia knows what it means to maintain forests, and they don't intend to give up and to let it go because they have a strong use of their forestry residue. But we are probably in a similar trajectory as the e-fuels, to summarize it, when it comes to the second generation or advanced. We first need to get the visibility and the certainty in terms of what will be accepted. And then we will be able to move from pilot to more industrial type production sites.
Thank you, Alan. For your information, Alan, your video has been turned off. Not to you.
Oh,
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if that was intentional or a mistake.
No, I didn't touch it, and I see myself. That's strange. Let me just try to. Your camera has been disabled. Who did it? Not me.
Maybe it was done centrally. It's no problem. Let me continue with the next question. There is a question from Wally Fonseca. What is the future for green hydrogen in Europe vis-a-vis the US?
Well, I'd say when we look at green hydrogen from a European perspective, it could be seen by some as the new silver bullet. It is the hydrogen strategy that the EU has put together, the significant investments funding that the EU is enabling for the hydrogen strategy shows how much it is a central point in the strategy for alternative fuels or for alternative energy sources in the EU. Now, the challenge is that the Inflation Reduction Act and the investment attractiveness that it includes in the way it has been constructed is starting to be a bit of a competitor to Europe's hydrogen strategy, and investors will make choices where they will invest. Currently, we do see that the IRA has given and has a very positive judgment in the investors community, and it puts at risk, and you can see how Europe is nervous about that and how they are trying to develop their own strategy to oppose it. So I think the battle has started. I'm not sure whether they will be able to find compromise means there. But at least it is a critical strategy for both regions, for sure.
Great. Thank you, Alan. There's a question from Daniel Gottschalk.
Yeah, Alain, thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. I hope we can get it afterwards. It was a perfect summary. And one of the key points from my perspective is what you mentioned about value chain alliance, new types of partnerships in order to deliver the investments that are needed. From your perspective, do we have the types of alliances that we need already in place at European level? Is there something missing in an ideal world from your perspective? What types of partnerships between industry and public authorities should we need? What types of financial vehicles, other support mechanisms in order to move forward?
Thank you, Daniel, and good afternoon, by the way. I think when it comes to the Alliance for Renewable and Low Carbon Fuels and the value chain, I think that the Commission has done its homework, at least when it comes to setting up the Alliance. Where the Commission has been, obviously, internal differences of views, where the Commission has been a bit, I'd say, not exactly meeting our objective, is by limiting the scope of that alliance mainly to aviation and maritime. We believe that it needed also to include road for the reasons I already explained, creation of the lead market, probably some users that will maintain, and because we believe that there is no reason today to close the door. Fuels for transport road are a no regret option. If they don't work in road, we'll take them to aviation and maritime. It's not either or, it can be both. And if it doesn't have a place anymore in one of the two, it goes to the other. It's very simple, and that you can do with those fuels. It's really very extremely simple. They are trying to bring together within the structure of that alliance with a number of roundtables that are looking into several aspects. There is one specific aspect, is what is needed to create a value chain. And that's an extremely important roundtable where we do have work that is ongoing. It has started more or less a month, I'd say November, and they're having regular meetings. The idea is to come with a real plan and a real strategy. And I think with this, we do have the starting point, but it would have been probably better if we would have had road as a whole included in there. They did keep it, but we had to struggle and to fight for the name. It is called land transport. And land transport in their mind means not what is on the road, but what is on the land, agriculture machinery, construction machinery, military, security, etc. So with that open door, we hope that we can still get that role and where road can be part of it. But the alliance by itself, I'd say, is already a first very good step.
Very good. Wonderful. Thank you. Yes, thank you, Dan. Any other questions from the audience? So maybe, well, if people have this question from Milan, what is the who's leading in the research of what may lead to low carbon liquid fuels? Is it the US? What's happening in Asia? What is your knowledge of that from an innovation perspective?
I'd say we have at least from the way I see the project appearing, in some cases blooming or disappearing because none of them are successful. I believe that where the first work has been done is in Europe, is in the EU. Since 2008, we know, and even before, we already knew that there was a direction towards a lower carbon society. The ambitions have been very quickly reviewed, and the union decided that they would be showing by leading. And the objective of the Paris Agreement was really the moment when we knew that we had to shift. That research has been already started. What's interesting is we do have a lot of research in the bigger energy companies and their big research teams. But what is also very interesting is the number of smaller companies, smaller startups. And a number of them are still there, struggling, unfortunately, not able to pass, I'd say, to the second stage, to the second level, where we can move from what is a small pre-industrial production capacity into something which becomes significant. And I would not be able to really name one of those as a big industrial player today. That's really, I think, what is the downside. Regarding the US, they had, of course, the lead through California that has been very much giving also the directions similar to what the EU has with their legislation on electrification, but they have been much more supportive of biopenetration, which was not the case in Europe. Bio has been a bit pushed back in the beginning. They didn't always understand why Europe was acting at that, and they are very supportive also of the way e-fuels can do it. And they do have now a second piece that also describes a strategy for biofuels. I'd say that the way American authorities, be it state level or at a federal level, set up their policies, their frameworks, is more effective in the results than the way they do it in Europe.
What is the your sense about the December development of the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory of the fusion discovery? Do you think that is likely to be part of your 2050 landscape or not?
I think we have learned that scrapping nuclear and what has been done was a strategic mistake when it comes to energy security. Many countries have changed their mind. Some are looking back into it. If you can define the technology that is able to increase the security of the nuclear technology, I would probably believe that this can grow fairly quickly. But I'm not in the nuclear business, so that's really a personal view.
Any other questions from anybody else in the audience? I guess this is the last call. So I think there are no more questions. So my turn is then to thank Alain once again for a very captivating presentation. Thank you very much. We're looking forward to see what the developments are. We will take this presentation. We will try to distribute it in video or in printed format, and people can access that. So thank you once again, Alain. Thank you, everybody else who organized this at the University of Toronto.
Thank you very much to you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, and everybody have a very good week.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.